repeated information, repeated knowledge about what we have studied for the whole 4 or 5 months. And I hope that knowledge we take you to another step. And please do use your credits, because anatomy is like 5 credits, isn't it? It is quite a lot. It is quite a lot of credits. So you have to use it. You don't leave it like, oh, finish anatomy and I'm no longer interested in college, I'm going to work. No, don't do that. Just keep staying in the college, do another class, and then keep staying in the education environment. And then finally, you will have a package to take another step. So let's start with the nervous system. I believe, we all know what our nervous system does for us. Like, it is like nearly everything, isn't it? It is like thinking, seeing, like touching, feeling sensations, and hearing. So everything is related to nervous system in our life. Like if we see something, like say if here we see a glass of water, and that's the light will go into the eye, and this light coming from the glass of water will go into the eye, and then go to the retina, and then that photoreceptors from the retina will take the electrical impulse and take it to the brain, and the brain is an integration center, so which will interpret what we see. Hey, this is a glass of water, it is a clean water, it is a cold water, I'm thirsty. So all sort of thinking process integration happens in our brain. And finally, the brain will send us with the motor. So like, hey, go and pick it up and drink it. So that's a lot of comments here. Like the brain will send a motor impulse. I believe you will have to study about motor impulse and action potential in the physiology lectures. So the brain will send out the electrical impulse, which will act as a motor output, go to the musculoskeletal system, like the muscles contract and pick up the glass of water and might drink it. So that's a lot of things going on with just seeing a glass of water, thinking inside the brain, and then the action and reaction goes. That's our nervous system. It is so complex. Meaning it is difficult to understand. So we take it, step by step. I mean, like even for one slice, we will go like, man, we split after again and again and again to understand this nervous system. But just to make it easy, our nervous system can be divided into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. So like, everything we try to classify, like everything in life, like from the very first lecture, cell, different types of cells, squamous, columnar, that sort of epithelial cell, the connective tissue, that sort of, we just try to divide. And now we will divide the nervous system into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. What is central nervous system? Central nervous system is brain and spinal cord. So the brain inside our cranium and the spinal cord inside our spinal canal. That is the central nervous system. So anything other than brain and spinal cord is peripheral nervous system. Whether the nerve is big or small or very tiny or in the fingertip or close to the neck, doesn't matter. If it is not brain and spinal cord, we will take it as peripheral nervous system. So all the cranial nerves. So we know that we have 12 cranial nerves in our body, and 12 pairs, like right 12, left 12, so 12 pairs of cranial nerve in our body. And these cranial nerves, they are coming out from the brain. And because it is not in the brain, so we will call it peripheral nervous system. What about the nerves coming out from the spinal cord in the neck region, like cervical? Because they are coming out from the spinal cord, so they are no longer spinal cord, and therefore they are really, really big structures, big nerves coming out, spinal nerve coming out from the spinal cord, and therefore they are included in the peripheral nervous system. Of course, those little nerves in our finger, that is peripheral nervous system. So if you want to remember this, brain and spinal cord is central nervous system, and anything other than brain and spinal cord is peripheral nervous system. So yes, the brain and the spinal cord is in our central nervous system. And like it is like a federal government, like it will not involved with everything, but everything we have to go through might have to go through the federal government. Like, you know, there are some processes like we do that at the state level. The same thing, like there are many different things like we just do it in the peripheral nervous system, but most of the time the central nervous system we want to control. So like brain and spinal cord, central nervous system. So peripheral nervous system is a little bit more complex because there are multiple nerves coming out from the brain and spinal cord. So we need to be a little bit systematic, like when we are studying this peripheral nervous system. Like everything, like in nervous system, we only have sensory and motor. So let's start the peripheral nervous system. Let's divide it into sensory and motor. So that is the division of the peripheral nervous system. Sensory mean or afferent. Afferent means like take towards the brain and spinal cord. So if we touch something, that touch sensation will be carried as an electrical impulse along the nerve and will go to the brain or spinal cord or the brain. And we know the brain knows that, hey, you are touching something soft, something hard, something rough, or it is hot, it is cold. So that integration will come back down and come back, and we will react with our motor system. So sensory is afferent, A-F-F-E-R-E-N-T, afferent, taking to the spinal cord and the brain, and motor is efferent, coming back from away from the brain and spinal cord. So sensory and motor. So sensory can be somatic sensation. Somatic sensation means like our core body, like our finger touch sensation, pressure sensation, temperature sensation, joint position. Let's say if you are keeping your wrist in this position, you know that your wrist is in flex position. If we are keeping our wrist in that position, we know that our wrist is in upward position. So without opening our eye, without seeing, we know that our wrist is in the upward cocked position or our wrist is in the flex position without seeing. So that is what we call joint position sense, the position of the joint. We know without seeing. So temperature, touch, joint position, and a few other things, it is for the somatic sensory. So let's say if you touch somebody, that touch sensation is somatic sensory. But what's happened from those sensations from the stomach? So stomach sensation, like you eat something and your stomach distended, and that distension, because it is coming from the visceral organ, we will call it visceral sensory. So generally, our sensation can be divided into somatic sensory and visceral sensory. Visceral sensory means the sensation coming from our visceral organs, like you eat a lot and your stomach is full. Your stomach is stretched, your stomach is distended. And that might interpret as, hey, fullness. Hey, I'm not hungry at all. I am satiated. So I'm satisfied with what I have eaten. So that sensation is coming from the visceral organ, and therefore we will call it visceral sensory. Here, visceral sensory. But the one, like I said, like touch, temperature, joint position, that sort of sensation is, we will call it somatic from the body, somatic sensory sensation. So we will have two types of sensation, which one coming from the body, which is temperature, touch, joint position, and coming from the visceral organ, which we call it visceral sensory. So whatever it is, the visceral sensory or the somatic sensory, we have to come to the spinal cord, and then we go to the brain, or they might just cycle back from the spinal cord and then go back again, like our swallowing reflex or micturition reflex. Like there's the bladder distend and we squeeze it out. That's it. So that's something like spinal cord level, and we don't even think about that, like reflexes. So these sensation, like visceral sensation or somatic sensation, we come to the spinal cord level. They might go back directly from the spinal cord, or they might go up to the brain and go back as motor. So what about the motor or efferent portion of the peripheral nervous system? Yes, again, like the way we classify, like, coming from the somatic organs or visceral organ, we will go back to the somatic organs or visceral organs. So the motor efferent, going back to the somatic body system, like our muscles, our skin, our temperature, this sort of motor is called the somatic motor, which is under our control. So let's say if we touch something, it is hot, that sensation go to the spinal cord and go to the brain, and the brain interpret as, hey, it is hot, it is unpleasant sensation, this finger come back out. So stop touching the heat. So that is the voluntary control, and that is under the somatic motor system. Of course, if we have somatic motor, we will need to have visceral motor. So we have somatic sensory and we have somatic motor. We have visceral sensory and we need to have visceral motor. That visceral motor is called autonomic nervous system. So autonomic nervous system is equal to visceral motor system. So movement of the visceral organ, like beating of the heart, like movement of the gastrointestinal tract, which is not our control. It is just autonomic. It is just on its own. It is just keep moving. This gastrointestinal tract is keep moving, keep absorbing, and keep pushing the food and keep absorbing all the nutrients without our awareness, or we cannot do much. Of course, our outside brain, we have some influence. So control of the visceral organ will come under the autonomic nervous system, and control of the voluntary, like motor, skeletal muscles, voluntary muscles, they will come under the somatic or somatic motor system. So peripheral nervous system can be divided into sensory and motor. For sensory, we will have somatic sensory, and for the visceral, we have visceral sensory. For the motor, we will have somatic motor, and for the visceral organ, we have visceral motor, which is also called autonomic nervous system. So under the autonomic nervous system, we know that we have sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sympathetic, we slow something, but parasympathetic, we have opposite, influence. So sympathetic and parasympathetic need to be balanced together. So this page is really important, guys. So the central nervous system include brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is everything other than brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, we have sensory and motor. Sensory coming from our body, like skin, joint, muscles. That is what we call somatic sensory. The sensation coming from the visceral organ like our heart, our stomach, our gastrointestinal tract. It is the visceral sensory. They will go to the spinal cord and they might go to the brain and then come back down as a motor. Motor again can be divided into motor for the somatic structure, which is called somatic motor, and motor for the visceral, which is called visceral motor. And visceral motor is also called the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system can again be divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic. So this diagram is important. What I want you to do is I want you to have a sheet of paper and just draw it down the flow so that you will remember. And you might forget, you know, it doesn't matter. It's not about forgetting things. It is about repeating. So that's the only way we will survive in anatomy and to some extent, you know, in physiology. So like it's a little bit of repetition and again, and then you will gradually get into that. So autonomic nervous system is the visceral motor system. So autonomic nervous system is visceral motor system, which is combination of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So yes, we have a little drawing on your plain sheet of paper. Nervous system can be divided into central and peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system includes brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is anything other than brain and spinal cord. So the cranial nerve coming out from the brain, it is peripheral nervous system. And the nerve coming from the spinal cord, it is peripheral nervous system. The radial nerve we see around the wrist or the tip of the finger, these are all peripheral nervous system. And nervous system, as we know, include sensory and motor. So sensory from the somatic structure like body, somatic sensory, sensory from the visceral organ like stomach, colon. So this is the visceral sensory. They will go to the spinal cord, they might go to the brain, and they will come back out as a motor to do something. So motor can be divided into somatic motor and the visceral motor. Visceral motor is also called autonomic nervous system. And visceral motor can be further divided into sympathetic division and parasympathetic division. So we have to have the flow chart. Flow chart, of course, you know, if you really look in our body, everything is complex, like everything is going here and there, and then it is so difficult to know which is going in or going up. So like this is New York City in 1887. Look at the power lines, you know, it is going crazy here, meshing around like a network. Like it is the same like in our body. All the cranial nerves are coming out, peripheral nerves. The brain is just there, it is just close to all the ganglions, and that is what we have to sort out. That is what we need to sort out. And that's the beginning. This lecture is the beginning. So peripheral nervous system, it's just a little bit of repetition. Peripheral nervous system, we have sensory and motor. For the sensory, we will have somatic sensory or visceral sensory. Or motor, we will have somatic motor, which is voluntary, like you touch it, you squeeze it, you spread your fingers. So that sort of movement is somatic motor, which is under voluntary control. And we will have the visceral motor for visceral organs, which is to good extent, you know, not under our direct control, like the heart. Of course, the heart is beating at its own rate, might be like 70, 80 beats per minute. That is, it's autonomically controlled by the spinal cord and the brain. Of course, that we can influence that heart rate. If we run, like if we do exercise, our heart rate will go up. If we get upset or excited, anxiety, our heart rate will go up. So the emotion will control the heart rate. But in normal situation, we are not doing anything with the heart, because when we are talking to each other like this, the heart is beating on its own. I do not have any control on my heart. So like sensory and motor, somatic sensory, visceral sensory, motor, somatic motor, and somatic motor, it is also called voluntary, and visceral motor, which is not our control. That is what we call the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system, we will have sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sensory and motor, and we talk about for the sensory, somatic or visceral, we will have general somatic sensation, and we will have special somatic sensation. So it is dividing again after another after another. So if we go back, it is pretty simple. The sensation, we have somatic sensation and visceral sensation. Motor, we will have somatic motor and visceral motor. But if we want to elaborate a little bit more, especially in the sensory, this is what we are going to get. Yeah, we will get somatic. For somatic sensory, we will have general somatic or special somatic sensation. For the visceral, again, like we will have general visceral sensation, or we will have special visceral sensation. Motor, let's try to ignore at the moment. So sensory, somatic sensory, visceral sensory. Somatic sensory will be further divided into general somatic sensory or special somatic sensory. Visceral sensory will further divided into general visceral sensory or special visceral sensory. What am I talking about? Yes, sensory means somatic sensory, visceral sensory. We talk about general somatic sensory or special somatic sensory, and we have general visceral sensory and special visceral sensory. So general somatic sensation is like what we talk about, like touch. If you touch something, you know that is your general somatic sensation. You will know pain. So the pain is under the somatic, general somatic sensory. So touch, temperature, pain, pressure, vibration, and proprioception. So yes, you will also have to learn this in your physiology lecture, but I want you to take it as much as you can now. So touch, temperature, pain, pressure, proprioception, and vibration. So these 6 sensations, they are coming from the skin or body wall or the joints or the limb. So they are under the general somatic sensory. So what about special somatic? So it is like hearing. So you hear something. That is the special somatic sensory. Why hearing is special? Because, if we talk, there will be vibration which will be carried along the external ear. Then ear membrane, tympanic membrane will vibrate, and that moves that process, like ossicles inside the ear and the nerve conduction from the 8th cranial nerve towards the brain, and we understand as a information. So that is really, really awkward, isn't it? Someone is talking, and that talk will make vibration, and that vibration come to our ear, And from the ear, all the organs, internal organs move in the ear, and the nerve will carry that stimulus towards the brain, and the brain interpret as some sense. If we have a good normal brain, then that makes sense. So this is not just a simple process. It is a special process, and therefore we put it hearing as the special somatic sensory equilibrium, like our balance. Like if we stand up in the environment, when we stand up, we know that we are upright. And so if we close our eye, can we know that we are stay upright? Yes, we do, but because we have an equilibrium, because our feet and joint and position sensation, proprioception, everything is giving us the information, hey, you are upright in the air. So doesn't matter if we close our eyes, this equilibrium sensation is there, and we will keep ourselves upright. So once we get old, this equilibrium, we will get lost, and therefore elderly people are prone to get fall, because their equilibrium sensation is gradually getting worse. And hearing, vision. So the way I try to remember is EV, like electric vehicle, like E mean equilibrium and hearing, and V vision. So vision and hearing, it is for the special somatic sensory, and the 6 like touch, temperature, 2T, pressure, pain, proprioception. Proprioception means vibration as well. So that's included under the general somatic sensation. So what about the visceral sensory? Visceral sensory might be a little bit easier because it is all coming from our viscera. So that's like, from the stomach, colon, so that is general. So the sensory receptors, they will detect the stretch. So if we burn the inside, if we put fire inside the stomach might not know, or might know, but if we stretch it, if pull the stomach, like if we eat a lot of food, the stomach will get stretched, and that stretch, the stomach will know, hey, it is being stretched. So that sort of sensation, chemical, if we have acid in our, lot of acid in our stomach, then the stomach will present as burning or heat sensation. And if you eat something which is not comfortable to you, like if you are allergic, irritate, the stomach will get irritated. So these nausea, hunger, so all this sort of awkward sensation from the gastrointestinal tract or all the visceral organ, they will come to the brain and tell us as general visceral sensation. So general visceral sensation include stretch, pain, temperature, chemical. So don't worry about these sensations, but everything you feel from your stomach, it is the visceral, general visceral sensory. So just try to remember that way. Don't dig in too much. So everything you feel from your stomach, like your hunger, your acid reflux, you eat a lot, your stomach gets stretched. So all these sensations will be coming under the group of general visceral sensation. So what is the special viscera? Special viscera is taste and smell. So you smell good, you want to eat it, you taste good. So that's taste and smell comes under the viscera, special visceral sensation. Of course, you know that somatic motor is moving the skeletal muscle or voluntary muscle, like flexing your bicep or tightening your external anus sphincter or tightening your external urethral sphincter when the time is not appropriate. So these are the somatic motor. And visceral motor is movement of our visceral organs like stomach, colon, small intestine, large intestine. So these are the visceral motor, which is also called the autonomic nervous system, and which includes sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So yes, I have talked a lot on one page. I have talked a lot. I'm sorry, but we have to go through this. We have to go through this. So peripheral nervous system, we will have sensory and motor. Sensory, motor. For the sensory, we will have somatic sensory, visceral sensory. For the motor, we will have somatic motor and visceral motor. Motor is much easier to remember. Somatic motor means our voluntary, which is like a skeletal muscle movement. So voluntary muscle movement. So visceral motor is movement of the, let's say, gastrointestinal tract, movement of the heart beating. So that is the visceral motor, which is a combination of autonomic nervous system. Autonomic, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sensory, somatic sensory and visceral sensory, it is a little bit difficult to remember, but try to remember as general somatic and special somatic, general visceral and special visceral. General, as I say, like six structure, touch, temperature, pressure, pain, proprioception, and vibration. That is under the general somatic. Special is, the way I try to remember is electric vehicle, EV, eye and the vision and the equilibrium, of course, hearing. So that is the special somatic, and visceral, general visceral is like anything coming from our stomach and gastrointestinal tract. Special visceral is our smell and our taste. That is, I hope you are following. I know it is a bit, but that is the beginning of the nervous system. And I hope, the nervous system, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, peripheral nervous system, we have sensory and motor. Sensory is somatic sensory or visceral sensory. Motor is somatic motor or visceral motor. Just try to keep it that way, and just try to draw on a plain sheet of paper. So let's go and dig into somatic sensory. Somatic sensory. Yeah, so we are just going to look into this 1/4 of the peripheral nervous system, which is somatic sensory nervous system. So somatic sensory, as we know that we will have general somatic and special somatic. In general somatic, it is general, so the receptors for the general somatic nervous system, somatic sensory nervous system, is widespread all over our body. So we will have it in our skin of the head, in the tip of the finger, in the tip of the toe, on the tummy, on the buttock, so everywhere. Because we have to know the touch and temperature and pain, pressure, and proprioception and vibration sensation everywhere. Therefore, the receptors for the general somatic sensory, they are widely spread out. So it is not in a particular position. But for the special, of course, it is the hearing and vision. So it is not everywhere. For the hearing, we will have only in the ear, and for the vision, we have only in the eye. So the receptors for these special somatic sensory, they are confined, they are only located in the particular place. So for example, like our skin, general somatic sensory, like skin, if we touch it, it knows the touch sensation. If we touch with the pressure, it is the skin, we know that it is pushing on the body. The same thing go on and on and on. So that is the skin general. But let's look at the visceral sensory. Yeah, visceral sensory nervous system. So let's look at this. We talked about this already, and now we are going to talk about the visceral sensory. Yeah, let's go and talk about the visceral sensory. Of course, visceral sensory means it is going to supply the viscera, and we know that visceral sensory we have general and special. Special is easy to remember, taste and smell. So you smell something, you eat it, you know the taste. So taste and smell is going to detect the chemical senses. They are under the special visceral sensory. So what about the general viscera? Like we have talked about that already. Stretch, the stomach will get stretched if we eat lots of food. Or the high acidity in the stomach. We might notice this acidity as pain. Like if we swallow like hot tea or hot coffee along the esophagus, we tell us the hot temperature, nausea, hunger. So all these sensations will come to our mind as from the pathway of general visceral sensory. So now we have talked about the peripheral nervous system portion, which includes sensory and motor. Sensory, we have talked about this. Sensory, we have somatic and viscera, and the visceral sensory, we have general and special. Somatic sensory, we have general and viscera. I hope it is not too much. Let's move on to the next slide, which is what we have talked about. So this is the peripheral nervous system, which can be divided into sensory component and visceral component. Sensory component, we will have somatic sensory and visceral sensory. Somatic sensory mean coming from the whole body. Visceral sensory mean or everything coming from the visceral organs. Somatic motor is under voluntary control, especially the skeletal muscles. And visceral motor is our visceral organ like heart, lungs, or the gastrointestinal tract. Visceral motor is also called autonomic nervous system, which includes sympathetic and parasympathetic. Somatic sensory, general somatic, special somatic. Visceral sensory, general somatic, special somatic. Specials are easy to remember: hearing and equilibrium, taste and smell. Okay, so this is a little reminder, the building blocks, what the building blocks for the bone, the basic unit of the bone is osteon. You remember that, you know that already. And the basic structural unit for the muscle is sarcomere. And basic functional unit for the kidney is nephron. I hope you remember nephron. And basic structural unit for the nervous system is neuron. So nervous system is nothing without neuron. A bone is nothing without osteon. And skeletal muscle is nothing without sarcomere, and kidney. All the nephrons are gone, the kidney doesn't function anymore. So these are the basic structural units. These are the basic structural units of our body. So nervous system is of course made of neuron. And the same thing, like, the neurons cannot stand on their own. Neurons, we need cells supporting around them. Like, everything in life, we need somebody. We need somebody around us so that, they will help us. They will give us information, and it's just the same, like a neuron for the survival. It needs the other supporting cell, which we call as neuroglial cells. So a nervous system is made of the neurons and neuroglial cells. Neuroglial cells are supporting cells. They do not function as the nervous system, but the neurons, these are the neurons are the workhorse of the nervous system. But neurons different way, they need support from the neuroglial cells. So nervous system, neuron and neuroglial cells, and neuron is an excitable cell, excitable tissue. So I believe, you guys are doing physiologies, or you guys will be going to do physiology at some point. So physiology, when you do physiology, you will have to talk about action potential. So action potential, action potential, action potential, that is a hot topic in physiology. And the action potential happens only in the excitable tissue. So action potential does not happen in non-excitable tissue. One of the excitable tissue is neuron. Neuron is the excitable tissue, and it will transmit electrical signals. The neuroglial cells will support the neuron, and we nourish the neuron. We protect them. We protect the neuron from being damaged. So neuroglial cell job is to support the neuron. Neuron is the neuron will transmit electrical signals. So whatever it is, the nervous system embryonic origin is from the neural tube and neural crest cell. Can anyone remember the three germ layer, endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm? From which germ layer this nervous system derive? Yeah, so the endoderm, mesoderm, ectoderm, I hope you remember these. So nervous system derived from ectoderm, isn't it? Ectoderm, the outermost layer, which makes the skin, but it gives the brain and spinal cord as well. Mesoderm is for muscles and bone, like red in color, and endoderm is for the inner lining, like epithelial lining. Epithelium, they derive from the lining of the gastrointestinal tract. They derive from the endoderm. So nervous system derived from the ectoderm, which gives the neural tube and neural crest cell. So the embryonic origin of our nervous system is ectoderm, which we change into neural tube and neural crest cell. So yes, neuron. I believe in our first or second lecture we talk about neuron to not a very big time, but we talk about that. Neuron is the functional unit of the nervous system. The brain doesn't function without neuron. And neuron has got cell body, dendrites, and axon. So this is the cell body, and these branches are the dendrites, and this big long process is called axon. So cell body, dendrites here, like a tree branches, and the long single axon. And the job is to transmit the electrical signals. So these dendrites will act as a receptor. They go and sense in the periphery, and this periphery information will be conducted to the cell body, and the cell body, in response to these sensation stimulus, it will generate electrical impulse, action potential, from here, there, and then finally go to the end of the axon terminals, and then might secrete something, for example, like acetylcholine. So that's the way our neurons work. So yeah, this is the structural unit or functional unit of the nervous system. It includes cell body, dendrites, and the axons. So neuroglial cells are not related to the neuronal cell, not related to the nerve cell, not related to the neuron. Their job is to support the neuron and protect the neuron. How do they do that? Because they secrete myelin. They secrete myelin, and myelin will wrap around the neuron, so that neuron gets protection. And they will maintain the homeostasis, mean environment of the neuron. So loss of loss of hydrogen ion, calcium, sodium. So that sort of environmental changes the neuroglia cell will detect, and therefore the neuroglia cells are non-neuronal cells, and their job is to support and protect. So this is a neuron guide. I believe you have seen in our cell and tissue. There are 4 types of tissues in our body, as a reminder. Number 1 is epithelial tissue. Number 2 is connective tissue. Number 3 is muscle tissue. And number 4 is nervous tissue. So a human being is made of 4 types of tissue. So what is a tissue? A tissue is a combination of cells which have similar function. Yeah, so like epithelial tissues will be made of epithelial cells, which are like columnar epithelium, which will create columnar epithelium or cuboidal epithelium. So nervous tissue, this is neuron, like a jellyfish. This is under the microscope. This is the drawing. This is the drawing. And this is the cell body. These are the dendrites, and this is the axon. Axon, before it became axon, when it is coming out from the cell body, it is pretty wide, like a bell shape. This bell-shaped region is called axon hillock. And these are the little dendrites. Dendrites will just spread like fingers and try to detect the try to behave like a receptor, try to go out as detector. And all the detected stimuli will be carried to the center cell body. And cell body has a nucleus, big nucleus, and with central nucleolus. This nucleus is in the center of the cell body. So when a neuron is dead or dying, this nucleus will become small and we go and sit in a little corner. So it is no longer present in the center. So if a neuron is dying or not, that's the way you check. Look at this nucleus. It is sitting in the center of the cell body of the neuron. So this neuron is still alive. If it is going to die, then this neuron will just become smaller and go and sit in one of the corners somewhere around here. That means that neuron is going to die. And that will become the axon hillock. It will have rough endoplasmic reticulum. Finally, it will get into the region called axon hillock. And finally, it will become the axon. Axon is covered with the myelin. Here, the blue structure is called myelin. Myelin arises from the neuroglia cell, but it is really awkward. This myelin is only for this region. This myelin is only for this region. This myelin is only for this region. And in doing so, we are creating gaps without the gaps in the axon without myelin. So these are what we call nodes of Ranvier. Nodes of Ranvier. These are the gap in between the different myelin sheets. And the cell which produces myelin is called Schwann cell. That's quite a lot. That's quite a lot. So I'm going to stop here and I will give you a little break. So I'll give you a little break. So we will take about 15 minutes break. We are now 10:50. So we will meet at 11:05. Yeah. So I hope it was not too much. I'm not going a when we come back, but we need to know. That's all about it, isn't it? We are studying anatomy. We're talking about neurons. This is the clinical photograph, and this is the drawing like neuron. And we need to know the characteristics of neuron. It is interesting to know the characteristics of neuron. Number one, it is not difficult. Like if it's just like a lot of common sense here. Number one, like extreme longevity. So like the neurons in our brain and spinal cord and hands and everything, they have to live as long as we live. So, if the neurons in our brain got damaged, we will get dementia. So this means like, these neurons they live extreme long life. As long as we live, they do live. So number one is extreme longevity. And number two, they do not divide, which means like if we damage our brain, that damaged area will be filled with scar tissue, not with new neuron. Like it is very different from bone. Yet a bone, if it is broken, the bone will be healed and they will heal with the new bone. So a bone will heal with new bone formation, but a neuron and nervous tissue will not heal with new nervous tissue. Like the same thing like the muscle will not heal with new muscle. The muscle cannot regenerate, the brain cannot, the neuron cannot regenerate. And number three is the neurons have high metabolic rate. That means they need lots and lots of oxygen. So that is the reason, like, if we found somebody on the floor unconscious, what do we have to do? We have to make sure their airway is patent, just to give good oxygen, of course, to the heart, and at the same time, of course, to the brain, so that we try to feed the brain as much as we can with loads and loads of oxygen. If someone has got brain injury, we have to give lots and lots of oxygen so that the neuron can survive, because the metabolic rate of neuron is really, really high. And of course, the neuron is one of the excitable tissue, and therefore it will carry electrical signal in the name of action potential or nerve impulse. So yes, 4 characteristics of neuron. So the same thing, like, I believe you remember, like when we talk about the epithelial cell, the characteristics of the epithelial cell, we talk about that, isn't it? Cellularity and polarity and that sort of stuff. And now we have to remember the neurons' characteristics. It's long life. As long as we live, these neurons for the hands, the brain, need to function well. They do function well in most of the people. Of course, if they do not function, we will have like dementia or this sort of problem. And it is just you get only one and one only neuron. They will not regenerate, they will not divide. And they have high metabolic rate. So therefore, they need lots and lots of oxygen, and their job is to carry electrical signal in the name of action potential or nerve impulse. So, of course, neurons are mainly in the central nervous system, but there will be neurons in the peripheral nervous system. And if you a group of neurons is called ganglia. So a few little things about neurons to remember, and I believe you will remember that. And looking at the neuron again, the cell body, nucleus, dendrites, axon hillock, and that will become axon, which is covered with the myelin sheath. So dendrites, look at the dendrites. Dendrites are receptive sites. So dendrites will act as a receptor. Dendrites will be everywhere close to the skin so that it can detect the stimulus like temperature touch. Dendrites will detect it and they will take the sensation as electrical impulse to the cell body. And the cell body, as is written here, biosynthetic center for and receptive region. So all the information taken by the dendrites, we bring it towards the cell body. So I hope you are following. And what is the axon? Let's talk about the axon. Axon halo, the cell body wide portion is called axon halo and gradually narrow, and this portion is called axon. And a few little things it is, let's say, good to remember, not a must know, good to remember. Number one, a few little, like, axon, the uniform diameter along its length, which means the length, the diameter of axon here, diameter of axon here, or diameter of the axon there, the same diameter. And it will carry the electrical impulse from the cell body towards the periphery, towards the axon terminal, which is called terminal putations. So the direction of the electrical impulse is from the cell body along the axon to the terminal putations. Yes, for the sake of completeness, it's contained chromatophilic substances, neurofilaments, but they do not have ribosomes, and therefore they cannot produce protein. So axon cannot produce protein. Why? Because they do not have ribosome. The axon can be long or can be short. If it is a long axon, that is what we call a nerve. So the sciatic nerve we saw when we talk about the lower limb, the sciatic nerve we saw, it is a cell body in the spinal cord, and it's long axon coming out. Therefore, long axon is called nerve fibers. And the nerve will be small or large diameter. So it is just like, it reflects the speed of the nerve conduction. So it is similar to the freeway. If the freeway is like big freeway, it will bring cars quicker, and small narrow lanes, the traffic will be slow. The same thing, like large axon, we have higher speed, and smaller axon, we have lower speed of conduction. And the end is called terminal arborization or terminal putations. So I hope it is not too much. I think if you can forget, you might forget this contain chromatophilic substance, neurofilaments. That's not that important, but the rest is easy to remember. The axon along its length, the same diameter. The bigger the axon, the quicker the conduction, speed of conduction. The smaller the axon, the slower the speed of conduction. And it will take electrical impulse from the cell body towards the terminal putations. Axon we do not have ribosome, and therefore they cannot produce protein. That's all. Yes, I know, it is like lots of facts coming in and in and in, but yeah, I hope this is not difficult. So let's look at the synapse. What is a synapse? Synapse means like one neuron and the other neuron connect each other. So that is a synapse. Synapse is one neuron connect with the other neuron, and they relay the information. So if you look at here, look at that, the axon from another neuron come to the dendrite portion of another neuron, and there will be transfer of information from this neuron and this neuron axon to the dendrite, and this dendrite will bring the information along the dendrite to the cell body, and from the cell body along its axon to its terminal button. So that's the way, like it is just like a, you know, like just taking one from another, the same information. So that is what we call synapse. So which means like this area is a synapse. This lady is giving this to the other lady, and they are transferring this information, this red information. So the same thing, like a synapse is a site of information transfer from one neuron, which will finally become axon, transferred to the dendrite of another neuron, and that information will be transferred and will be taken away via the another neuron. So now we know the synapse, and we have to appreciate there are two types of synapse, which is axon dendritic synapse and axon somatic synapse. So that is easy to remember. Axon dendritic synapse. So from one axon to the dendrite of another neuron. So from the axon to the dendrite, that is what we call axon dendritic synapse. And axon somatic synapse means that if this axon is going to the end terminal button and then go and attach to the, let's say, the muscle, then that will be called axosomatic synapse. So two types of synapse, axon dendritic and axon somatic synapse. Yes, let's move on. That is the relay, yeah, transfer of information. And this axon is taking the information here, transferring information to another axon here. This region is called synapse. So there are three types of neurons in our body. They are called unipolar, bipolar, or multipolar. So unipolar, multipolar, of course, multipolar neurons are the most common. About 99% of the neurons are multipolar neurons. Multipolar neurons are like the one we have seen, like cell body, dendritic processes, axon go out, terminal butony. That means like many dendritic processes come out from the cell body. So that's why it is multipolar neuron, because many dendritic processes come out from the cell body. And this process will be, information will be taken away from the cell body along the axon and go to the terminal button. So that is multipolar because we got lots of dendrites. So what about bipolar neuron? Bipolar neurons, the cell body is here in the center. If you look at that, dendrites, multiple dendrites here, they will fuse together. These dendrites will fuse and finally become one single dendrite, which will bring the information to the cell body. And from the cell body, axon go out and they will become terminal butony. So this is what we call bipolar, from here to there. One dendrite here, one axon here. Of course, multiple dendrite has been combined to form one single dendrite, and that will lead to the cell body. So that is what we call bipolar. And look at that unipolar or pseudo-unipolar. So if you look at this unipolar, means you are seeing a cell body, one single cell body here. Only one process come out. Look at that, only one process come out. And that will divide into right and left. And these processes are called peripheral process and central process. Peripheral process, we go and end as like a dendrite, which is what we call receptive endings, carry the information along the peripheral process, and along the central process, we go to the terminal Purkinje. But of course, the whole structure, that the one process coming out from the cell body, is it peripheral or central process? Doesn't matter. They are called axon. So this sort of the unipolar neuron is seen in the what do you call that, dorsal root ganglia. So dorsal root ganglia, you haven't seen that yet. Just an introduction, introducing the name dorsal root ganglia. So yes, multipolar neuron, bipolar neuron, and unipolar neuron, that's the difference. Multiple dendrites come out from the cell body, multipolar neuron. Only one dendrite come into the cell body and one axon go out, that is bipolar neuron. And unipolar neuron is only one structure come out from, and then finally split into two. That is what we call unipolar neuron. Yes, unipolar neuron, multipolar neuron. This is the multipolar neuron. The blue color is in the receptor region, receptive stimuli. So they are going to detect the stimulus, and dendrites will take the information and send it towards the cell body. This is the trigger zone, and this is the conducting region. So axon will conduct from the cell body, and then finally it will come to the terminal Purkinje. So that is the multipolar neuron. What about the bipolar neuron? Look at that. Both the dendrites, or one single dendrite, and the cell body is inside the trigger zone, and the rest go conducting region, and finally we go to the secretory or response region, like terminal Purkinje. The unipolar neuron is very different. It is just like, spreading arms, right and left arm with the little head, the neck, only one coming out from the cell body. This is what we call unipolar neuron. And it is found mainly in the dorsal root ganglia. So you will see dorsal root ganglia at some point. Yes, don't worry about this slide. It is just like, trying to elaborate the multipolar neuron, bipolar neuron, and unipolar neuron. But, look at, just appreciate this unipolar neuron, multiple like dendron-like processes, which is what we call receptive endings, and the peripheral process, and the cell body is here, only one come out, and central process here. And this is what we call like the nerve sensation, taking the information from here, come here, we go into the cell body, and then come back out here like that. So this sort of structure we will see in the dorsal root ganglia. The bipolar neuron we will see in the olfactory, so smell, and retina, eye. And the rest, hey, yes, everywhere, because it is 99% are multipolar neuron. So this is the cross section of a spinal cord. If you transect a spinal cord, you are going to see like this, like little H structure. It is color with darker color, and outside is lighter color. So this darker color region is called the gray matter, and lighter color region is called white matter. So if we transect a spinal cord, we will see the gray matter, which is the center H shape, and white matter, which is surrounding the gray matter. If you look at that, the gray matter contain neuron. Look at that, and neuron here at the anterior, here anterior, and this will be called posterior. Yeah, so anterior root will come out, and they are the motor division. We go and supply the muscle, so that will be voluntary, somatic. Somatic motor, whatever it is, motor will come from the anterior horn of the spinal cord, and sensory we have to go back into the posterior root. So look at that sensation from the body, we go and they go along the posterior root, and the motor anterior way come out from the anterior horn of the spinal cord. So now I hope you see the difference. Sensory come from the posterior root, and motor leave from the anterior root. And sometimes in between the sensory and the motor, we have a neuron connecting the sensory and motor. That is what we call interneuron. And these are the examples of eye, like retina, which is bipolar neuron in the retina. Okay. Type of neurons, sensory neuron. Of course, we have sensory function in the nervous system. Motor neurons, of course, we have the motor function in our nervous system. And interneuron is just only present in the central nervous system, which is in the brain and spinal cord. Interneuron connect the posterior dorsal root and the anterior ventral root neuron. That is the reason it is only exists in the spinal cord, and therefore it is confined to the central nervous system. So apart from neuron, what do we have in our nervous system? You know that neuroglial cells, of course, neuroglial cells. The job of the neuroglial cell is to support the neuron and for the insulation of the neuron. So just to protect it. How many neuroglial cells are there? Hey, there are 6. Do you need to know everything? No, you don't need to know everything. But it is interesting to know, and therefore I'm going to talk about these neuroglial cells. Let's spend a few minutes talking about the neuroglial cells, because if someone gets brain tumor, let's say if you see a patient with brain tumor, that brain tumor, of course, any brain tumor, any cancer, we have to think about primary or secondary. Primary means the tumor arising from the brain itself, or the secondary means it is coming from the lungs or coming from the liver or coming from the colon cancer. So like any brain tumor, we have any tumor, any cancer, we have to think primary tumor or secondary deposit. So I believe you know that. So let's say if it is a primary brain tumor, it will arise from the brain covering, which could be meninges or the brain substance itself, isn't it? So the brain substance is made of neurons and neuroglial cells, nothing more. The covering of the brain is made of meninges. So, any primary brain, any primary tumor inside the cranium, inside the head, could be arising from the meninges or the brain. So the tumor arising from the meninges is called meningioma. So tumor arising from the brain. So what is the tumor arising from the brain? It could arise from these cells, neuroglial cells. That's why, it is interesting to know the neuroglial cells, because the neuron doesn't use, as far as I know, neuron doesn't give tumor. And therefore, if someone has got primary brain tumor, it is usually or almost always from the neuroglial cells origin, because the cell that support the neurons divide, and control the vision, and that's become cancer. So these neuroglial cells are astrocytes, microglia cell, ependymal cell, oligodendrocyte, Schwann cell, and satellite cell. So as I say, you don't need to remember anything, but it is good to know, like astrocyte. So the tumor, the brain tumor arising from the astrocyte is called astrocytoma. Astrocytes, these are the most prominent cells of the neuroglial cells. Therefore, if somebody has got brain tumor, then we can easily say it could hardly be astrocytoma, because astrocytoma is the most abundant tissue in the brain. And therefore, if somebody has got cancer, then that cancer might be originate from the astrocyte. So astrocytoma, astrocytoma, astrocytoma. So there's a tumor arising from the astrocytes. Of course, it makes sense, isn't it? Astrocyte arise from is the most abundant cell inside the brain, and therefore astrocytoma is the most common tumor. The job of the astrocytoma is to regulate the neurotransmitters, ionic environment, so sodium, potassium, electrolyte, hydrogen ion, which goes to increase the blood flow. So that sort of stuff. So astrocytoma is doing a good job. It is the most abundant cell in our body. And if there is cancer, it could be from the astrocytoma. But, in general, if we see a tumor in the brain, we have to think about primary brain tumor or secondary brain tumor. Secondary brain tumor means the secondary deposit from the lungs cancer, secondary deposit from the colon cancer. But we are now just talking about the primary brain tumor, and primary brain tumor is most likely from the astrocytes. So we know the most abundant cell is astrocyte. What is the least abundant cell? It is microglia cell. The name tells, micro means small. It is the smallest, and it is the least abundant cell. But its job is really important. It's for phagocytic function. Ependymal cells for the CSF protection. It is the simple epithelium lining inside the ventricles, inside the brain. Oligodendrocyte and Schwann cell. So they do have similar function. Oligodendrocyte is for the central nervous system, and Schwann cell is for the peripheral nervous system. So their job is to produce myelin. Myelin is like that's what the blue color you saw. We will talk about myelin later. Their job is to produce myelin. Myelin production cell in the CNS is oligodendrocyte. Myelin producing cell in the PNS is Schwann cell. And satellite cells, it's around the cell body of neuron. So that's the neuroglial cell, which seems quite a lot, but to some extent, it is interesting to remember. It is not a must. No, I might put this question in your homework, but we will forget that, because I tend to forget these things. And if you forget, don't worry, because it is pretty much detailed. But I just wonder, it is like interesting. It is interesting to know these cells. Okay, let's move on. So look at that, astrocytes. As you know, astrocytes are most abundant cell, and their job is to control the environment, like electrolyte environment, neurotransmitter, ionic environment, and increase the blood flow. So most abundant, they are the, look at that neuron, the yellow color, jellyfish, and astrocytes. They are pretty similar to the neuron, like they are like a jellyfish as well. They are going and looping around the capillaries of the brain, and therefore capillaries of the brain, and therefore they will influence the constriction or dilatation of these capillaries, and therefore they will regulate the blood flow of the brain. So yeah, so look at that. And it is the most abundant astrocytoma. If one has got primary brain tumor, we can easily blame this astrocyte. That is what we call astrocytoma. So astrocytes, star shape, most abundant, regulate neurotransmitter, control the ionic environment, signal blood flow, and brain-derived trophic factors. A. So this all nonsense. Let's forget about that. Let's move on. Look at the little cells here. Here, neuron, and this is small. So which means microglia cell, which is the least abundant, which is the smallest cell, but they do a big job. Their job is to phagocytose these other cells. So that is the importance of the microglia cells. So least abundant, the smallest, phagocytic function, migrate and engulf, derived from the blood cells, monocytes, of course, monocytes. So ependymal cell, look at that. What does it look like? It looks like a columnar epithelium or cuboidal epithelium looking. It is lining on one side, and on other side, it is a fluid-filled cavity, so which is the cerebrospinal fluid-filled ventricles in the brain. So two lateral ventricles, third ventricle, and fourth ventricle, which we have to talk about. Fluid-filled cavity, and they have got little hair-like structures. So this is the ependymal cell, and they will secrete cerebrospinal fluids. So that's the job of the ependymal cell. And the cancer arising from these cells is called ependymoma. E-P-E-N-D-Y-M-O-M-A. So these cells, they become big, large, multiply, and then become cancer. So ependymal cell, simple epithelium, line the central cavity of the brain and spinal cord. Its job is to produce CSF. And it has cilia, have to CSF to circulate. So again, let's forget about it. This is so annoying. Now we will talk about oligodendrocytes. Oligodendrocyte, it is in the CNS. Schwann cell, it is in the PNS. Yeah, so oligodendrocyte and Schwann cell. Oligodendrocytes, they are covering, they are coating the axon. Look at that yellow axon being wrapped around with the myelin sheath. Look at that, the blue color is myelin sheath, and the yellow in the center is axon. So axons are being wrapped like a taco wrapped around with the myelin sheath. Where do we get these myelin? Of course, we got it from the oligodendrocytes here. So these oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. Inside the brain and spinal cord, we do have oligodendrocyte, and which are giving protection to the nerve axon. So axon need to be protected, otherwise axon will get damaged easily. We can't afford that. Therefore, these axons need to be protected. We will protect it with the myelin. Where do we get myelin? We got it from the oligodendrocyte in the central nervous system. But the way it has done is a little bit awkward. Why? Because this oligodendrocyte is wrapping around only this region. Another oligodendrocyte is wrapping around this region. Another oligodendrocyte is wrapping around this region. By doing so, different oligocyte is covering the different portion of the axon, and we have little gaps in between the myelin sheath here along the axon. We got gaps in between here, gaps. That is what we call the nodes of Ranvier. So this is the myelin gap. So the good thing about this is our electrical impulse will jump from here to there. They don't bother going along the axon here. They will jump from here to there, from here to there, from here to there, which makes the nerve conduction far more efficient. So that's the good thing about myelination. So this means if we damage our myelin sheath, our nerve conduction will be much slower. Yes, this is in the peripheral nervous system, which is covered with the myelin. This myelin comes from the Schwann cell. Yes, Schwann cell in the peripheral nervous system, the Schwann cell in the peripheral nervous system, and the oligodendrocyte in the central nervous system. Myelin sheath by oligodendrocyte in the CNS, Schwann cell by the peripheral nervous system. It is myelin sheath composed of myelin. Myelin is nothing more than fat and protein. And it surrounds the axon. We saw that already. And it acts as an insulating layer, prevent leakage of electrical impulse, increase the speed of impulse propagation, and make it more efficient. So it is for insulation, prevent leakage, increase the speed of impulse propagation. So that is a pretty cool, that is a pretty cool arrangement, so that whatever we do, the nerve conduction is become more and more efficient. They will contain all the electrical impulse so that doesn't disappear. Yes, look at that. That is the myelinated axon in the peripheral nervous system. You can see the axon here, the yellow structure running. You have to wrap here with the taco sheet, and you have to wrap round and round and round like an onion skin. So that is the properly, this axon is properly surrounded by the myelin sheath. Therefore, we will call it myelinated axon. But non-myelinated axon, are they not covered with myelin sheath? No, they do cover. They are covered with myelin sheath as well, but they are not properly or just wrapped around too much like that. They are just covered. That is what we call non-myelinated axon. So the difference is non-myelinated axon and myelinated axon. Look at the difference. The way the myelin sheath is covering the axon is multiple layers. That's the difference. Myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system, multiple concentric layer of Schwann cell membrane. You saw that. Tightly packed. You see the node of Ranvier, and nerve impulse do not travel along the myelin covered axon. Instead, they jump. So that increases the speed. So which is something like, the nerve impulse will not travel along the axon, which is covered by the myelin. It's just jump from here to there, to there, to there. So it is jumping along. So the speed is far quicker than just going along to G. So that's the way the human body is built. Like as I say, this is the cross section. This is the cross section of the spinal cord. You can see the gray matter and you can see the white matter, gray matter and white matter. And This is the gray matter. You have this is what we call anterior horn. This is what we call anterior horn. This is what we call posterior horn. And this is what we call posterior horn of the gray matter. The sensory or afferent from the periphery coming into the central nervous system will be taken in the posterior root. And there might be interneuron to connect the sensory and the motor. And this will come out from the motor, motor in red color will come out from the anterior horn and come out like that. And finally become the combination of sensory and motor is called a spinal nerve. Yeah, so this is, look at that, dorsal root and dorsal root ganglia, which is the unipolar neuron. Now you see this. And here inside the central there in the center of the gray matter, we have a little central cavity where our cerebrospinal fluid is running. If we get the nerve structure is very similar to the muscle. We will have like we have epimysium. The nerve has epineurium because it is nerve. In the muscle, we will call it epimysium. In the nerve, we call epineurium. The axon itself, axon is covered by the myelin sheath, or the multiple axon, they will be wrapped around by the perineurium. The axon, which is covered by the myelin, which is covered by the endoneurium, and this bundle of endoneurium covered axon wrapped together to call perineurium, multiple perineurium bundles covered with the epineurium. So therefore, when you go to the plastic surgeons, when they do microscopic surgeons, when they do nerve repair, they might be stitching back like an epineural repair or perineural repair, depending on how delicate they go. Of course, depending on how big the size of the nerve is, so that they can repair just the outermost layer, epineurium, or they might go down to the perineural repair. But of course, they cannot do the endoneurium repair because it is too tiny. And you can see the blood vessels are packed together inside the epineurium in a nerve. So that is the arrangement of the nerve, which is really interesting. So yes, it is nearly coming to the end of the lecture, guys. So just bear with me. So now we have the sensation, which we have to come into our center from the peripheral nervous system. We have to come into the central nervous system, which is made of brain and spinal cord. And there might be like reflex here. So this sensory, the blue sensory from the skin come here into the spinal cord. Here you can see the dorsal root ganglia. And finally, with the interneuron, it might go to the anterior horn, motor, and go to the effector organ or the motor, the voluntary muscle. So what's happened is here now, stimulus, let's say we poke the skin with a little needle, sharp-ended, pointed. So which means like our sensory receptors, which are the dendrites of the multipolar neurons inside our skin, they detect the sharp sensation, and that unpleasant sensation will be taken along the afferent nerve fibers and go into the spinal cord and go from the posterior root and via the interneuron, just go straight to the motor neuron and then come back out from the motor, and we just pull our hand away. So that is so much reflex. You touch heat, you don't think, like you just pull your fingers away straight away. So you touch the fire, it's hot, you pull the finger straight away. That is so much reflex, so quick. We don't even think this fire is hot. That is what this sort of speed is called the reflex. That is what we call reflex arc. So reflex arc from the sensory come into the posterior horn, and then with the interneural, we come to the motor neuron, and motor neuron will react appropriately. So that is what we call a reflex arc. So in other words, look at that here, little fire, you go and touch it. The fire is hot, just go from the peripheral nerve afferent, come into the posterior, and then go into the central with the interneural, and it just reflects. It doesn't go up. This information is not sent to the brain. At this level, we know that it is hot, and we don't even think. It's just go back, reflex, and come out here, motor, and then we will just flex our hand back. So the same thing, like, in the patellar tendon tap, like I hope you have seen like tapping on your tendon here, tap on your patellar ligament and the knee stretch. Why does it happen? The stretch receptor in this patellar tendon will come from the posterior root. They don't even have an interneuron. Look at that. They don't even have an interneuron. And then they will go and directly to the anterior horn motor and makes the quadricep muscle contract. So then the knee extend. So this is what we call monosynaptic stretch, because there is no interneuron. And here we have interneuron, therefore we call it polysynaptic reflex. So reflex is reflex, touch the fire, come back out, or tap the tendon will kick. So these are the reflex which happens within a fraction of a second. And that's the way this happens. Like sensory fiber from the tendon will go along the posterior root and kick in the motor root and then come back, contract the muscle, or might be with the interneural. So monosynaptic reflex and polysynaptic reflex. Too many neurons now, so don't worry about that. Yes, so it is a diverging. So look at the diverging. So from 1 to 2 neuron, from 2 to like 4 neuron, 4 to 8 neuron. That is what we call diverging. And this is converging, means from multiple neurons, we transfer information into one neuron, or the reverberating, like it's just go, come back, go, come back. So that is just for the information, not important for the exam, not important. I don't think it is important for our clinical life until many, many years later. So don't worry about that. So this is the neuron. Let's say if it is not reflex, then here, look at that, touching the fire, the heat sensation, you go here along the posterior root, dorsal root ganglion, we go into the spinal cord with the interneuron, we come back and you will just motor, just reflection. That is the reflex arc. That is the what only happen at the spinal level. Therefore, the brain doesn't even think. But what's happened here? At the same time, when the heat sensation came from the back, heat sensation came back from the head, and this information will also sent to the brain, and the brain knows now the fire is hot, and therefore we will not do it again. Therefore, it is more like lifelong learning, and this is more like reflex. This happened, we do this. That is very much reflex. And this is, if we have the cortical pathway, we will know that the fire is hot and we won't do that again. So this is a slower process. The spinal reflex is very rapid. Go and touch the fire, you just pull your hands out. That is the reflex, spinal reflex level. So it doesn't go to the brain, and therefore it's so quick. But here at the same time, when we are doing the spinal reflex, some of the information will go up to the brain and tell the brain will think, hey, fire is hot. I won't do it again, or at least I will pull my finger out. So that is the cortical pathway, which is a slower process. So that is the end of the, let's say the introduction to the nervous system. So that is the introduction to the nervous system. And in nervous system, we have sensory portion and motor portion. Sensory portion, we take sensation and give our body information. And motor portion, depending on the information, we will react appropriately as necessary. So the sensory portion will take all the information from the outside into our body, might be brain or spinal cord, and the motor will react as necessary. And when we talk about central nervous system, we are talking about central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system include brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system include anything other than the brain and spinal cord. And if you remember this slide, peripheral nervous system can be divided into somatic sensory and visceral sensory. Easy to remember, somatic mean body, so skin, body wall, limb, all somatic sensory, and movement of skin, body wall, limb, somatic motor, and visceral organ movement, which is called visceral sensory, and visceral motor, which is also called autonomic, that include sympathetic and parasympathetic, visceral sensory, the sensation inside the stomach, liver, heart. It is all the visceral organs are visceral sensory, and these four makes the peripheral nervous system. All right, guys, I'm going to stop here. Any question? Okay, so we will continue with the nervous system. So might be the whole November, nearly the whole November, we have to put up with the nervous system. So yes, try to flip these slides or flip the textbook. Please do. Only then, you will pick up the later lectures. So I hope everyone has done the exam. If you haven't, if you are any issue, for family issue or your own problem, or for many work, for many reasons, please let me know. I will open the exam for you, just for you, so that everyone can do the exam, because monthly exams will take the big portion of the final score. So okay, then if you do not have any question, please say goodbye to your colleagues.